Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today it's time for another houseplant haul. So we're going to go over all of the plants that I've acquired over this last month, the month of August 2020. If you follow me, you probably know that I've been taking it easy, let's say, on bringing plants into my home, but I did have a couple of small excursions this month, and I did happen upon a couple of plants that I've actually been looking for, so I'm excited to try them out in my home. So let's start off by talking about the peperomias that I acquired this month. So first off, I have this really lovely Peperomia albovittata Piccolo Banda. And I do want to say right off the bat that my broker refers to this as Piccolo Banda, which I played instruments growing up and I'm very familiar with the piccolo, so I call it Piccolo Banda, but my broker works with many people who are growing this plant directly, so I'm just wondering, anybody have any information about that? But this is such a beautiful plant, and I'm so used to seeing these smaller. If I'm not mistaken, this particular one in this 5-inch pot is grown from a company out of Canada, and those Canadian companies, whenever their peperomias come in stock in this shop where I work, they almost look a little too good to be true, you know what I mean? Like, it's just absolutely huge and stunning, and anytime I've ever seen Peperomia Piccolo Banda in the past, they've been so small, so I was really excited to try one of these out and see, is it too good to be true? So I don't think it is, but you know, we'll see about that in the upcoming months. I've only had this plant for a week and counting, so it's not something that I can really make a call on quite yet, but I really am quite a huge fan of peperomia, as you might know, so I've been kind of struggling growing this one myself in my home. I've had it directly under a grow light, and I've had it for, I'd say well over a year at this point, maybe almost 2 years. So I just really haven't had the best luck with it. So when I saw this, I figured, let's go ahead and give this a try, because it's really not that expensive of a plant. Peperomias in general really aren't expensive, which is nice. So you can get a plant like this, which is nice and sizable, and it really doesn't cost you a pretty penny at all. But speaking of other peperomias, they're normally quite small, so that's a pretty large peperomia. So this is another peperomia I have to share with you guys today, which is called Peperomia bamboo stalks. And if I actually turn this and hold it a little closer, you might be able to see why they call it Peperomia bamboo stalks, as those stalks look like bamboo stalks. So it's pretty interesting. And they say, I think, as like the leaves fall off of the plant, it looks more and more like bamboo, which is really interesting. I really kind of like imposter plants, so I think that's quite wonderful. Not really too much to say about this plant. It's rather small at the moment, but you can see it's clearly a peperomia. It does kind of give you a similar look to, say, like a Peperomia obtusifolia or a Peperomia viridis or a Peperomia clusiifolia. You can see how they all have kind of that similar appearance in the leaves, but this one just has that added bonus that the stalks or the stems look like bamboo stalks. So I just think that's really cool. Very succulent leaves. Really not the showiest of plants, but I just think it's one that a peperomia collector might enjoy a little bit more because of just those little added nuances in there. So peperomias really don't like to be overwatered. They're plants that appreciate a lot of humidity, but they really don't want to be overwatered, and they can rot quite easily. They're tropical succulents, let's say, so they are quite apt to smaller amounts of water, but they will do excellent in a terrarium setting with that added humidity in the air, and it will really kind of care for itself if it is in an enclosed environment. I've found, as I do grow a peperomia in my home under an enclosure, and I can't even tell you when I water that thing because it really just practically takes care of itself. So any more difficult peperomias out there, that might be the way to grow them, but I've heard that this one's a little bit easier, so I'm excited to try this one out in my home. And that's it for the peperomias this month, but I do have one more plant in the peperomia family, or the pepper family, the Peperaceae family, but this is a piper right here. So this is actually the black peppercorn. So this botanical name is Piper nigrum, and it's the black peppercorn. It's actually what produces the fruit that makes peppercorns. I just think that is just so interesting, and apparently you can grow this as a houseplant, which I just think is marvelous. So it looks very similar to Piper ornatum or ornatum that I grow in my home, and it's more plain than that, which I like plain plants. So just seeing that same leaf shape of my Piper ornatum on this black peppercorn here, I just think it's so interesting just seeing how similar yet different those plants can be. So I'm really excited to try this out. I've had some pretty good luck growing that Piper ornatum in my home, so I'm hoping that this one is as easy for me as that one, as the foliage on this one is a little less showy, which almost tells me perhaps it could be a little easier, but you know what, only time will tell. But it's just such a funky little plant. Really not the showiest of plants, but I think it's really cool. I really like pipers and peperomias, so I just am excited to try this one out. And let's move on to, so the Hoyas that I acquired this month, and I actually only got one Hoya right here. This is a Hoya Bella, and I actually already grow this one in my home. I have a much smaller one that I've been growing for a little while, and my grower had a couple of these, so I went ahead and got one, which I'm very excited about because I'd actually grown a hanging basket last year, and it was quite large and marvelous and bloomed many a times, but that thing got covered in mealybug like so fast, and it was actually my first bout with mealybug, and if that thing brought the mealybugs in my home, I should be probably second guessing on whether or not I want to get this again, because the mealybugs have done quite a number in my home now that I've been growing quite a few Hoya. The next time I water this plant, I'll be mixing some Houseplant systemic in with it, which is a granule or a powder that you mix in with the soil in your plants. It will tell you on the product how much to use in a specific pot size. And it's just kind of like a pesticide is the best way to put it, or an insecticide, where the leaves or the whole entire plant and the roots are going to suck up the whole thing. So if the pests try to damage the plant or harvest upon the plant, then they will actually die themselves, which is just like a great way to take care of it. However, it does not work on spider mites because they're mites. So you need to get a miticide for that instead of insecticide. So if you're having an issue with spider mites in your home, houseplant systemics aren't necessarily going to work on that. Just something to keep in mind. But it works great for mealybug on Hoya or thrips on my philodendrons or whatever I have. So it's just something that I definitely recommend if you've been struggling with pests. And I'll try to remember to leave the product or a product of that in my link. A link in the description, not sponsor whatsoever, just something that I recommend. So I'm hoping, long story short, that my bouts with this Hoya Bella is a lot better than my last one with the large hanging basket, because it's really quite an easy grower. It's just very susceptible to mealybug. This Hoya likes to stay a little bit more moist than other Hoyas I've grown, as the leaves are quite finer. But it's just quite like a magical, like ethereal looking Hoya compared to some of the other ones, in the way it just kind of like drapes down in cascades and just flowers these beautiful white and pink flowers quite easily. So I wouldn't be surprised if this one actually flowers for me. I can even see a little peduncle right here, but you know, this plant's quite new to my home and it's gonna have to acclimate, so I wouldn't be surprised if those peduncles don't last very long on my plant, but just something to be kind of excited about. And I don't have any other Hoyas, but I do have this Hoya relative right here. So this is a Dischidia lanceolata, and I actually think I had one of these that I mislabeled in my recent houseplant tour that I did, and it was kind of on the fritz, but I was out at a greenhouse and they had them, so I figured what an opportunity to try out another one. And I figured since I've been kind of struggling with it in the soil that I was growing it in, even though I don't think I really paid that much attention to it because it was totally hidden behind my Monstera deliciosa, I decided I was going to try this one out in sphagnum moss. So I have it wrapped to this piece of bark right here just so I can hang it up on the wall, and it's a very easy way for me to display plants in my home and not have to worry about taking up surface space, because I'm very limited on that, and I do have a nice wall in my home that gets some nice light where I've been growing a couple other Dischidias and Hoyas successfully, so I figured this one would fit right in there. But you might be wondering, how do I water this? I just simply take it to the sink and I wet it with the faucet or whatever you call it, and I just let it drip dry for a couple of minutes, and when it's done dripping, I just hang it back up. And if I notice that the back's a little wet, I might just pat it with a paper towel or a towel in general, and yeah, just keep it from getting water damage on my wall, which I have not had an issue of because I'm careful enough, but just something to keep in mind. But this is such a fun way to grow plants, and this is such a cool plant, so I just think this looks so funky the way it's growing on this piece of wood. Alrighty, so that's it for the categories for this video. So we're going to move on to the odds and ends. So the first one I want to share with you guys today is this Pellionia. And I forget the exact species name of this plant. I'll leave it on screen. It's like argentea or something along those lines. Pellionia are such underrated houseplants, and there's really only two main Pellionias that are on the market, which is the watermelon Pellionia, they call it, or sometimes they call it Pellionia pulchra, and then the standard Pellionia, which is Pellionia repens, and I think they commonly call this like creeping watermelon begonia vine or something along those lines. Some combination of all those words I just said. But this one is a little bit of a different one that I've been seeing a little less available on the market. And when I stumbled upon it at a greenhouse, I decided I had to give it a go because this plant is just totally my vibe. If you watch me for a while, you probably know that I really do enjoy my just plain green plants that just kind of, blend in with the rest and allow the other ones to stand out because I do grow a lot of plants in my home, so I really do want the ones that are much more showy to stand out, while I do also totally appreciate these ones that are just so magically just plain green and look like I could almost just have walked outside here in Philadelphia and just plucked a plant out of the ground, which you shouldn't do, but just plucked a plant out of the ground and brought it into my home and I'm growing it that way. So I just think it has such a magical woodlandy appearance, so I'm just such a big fan of this Pellionia. And my other Pellionias have been such easy plants to grow, so I figured this one would probably do the same. So I just have it sitting in this pot right now. Not sure exactly where I'm going to put it in my home, but it's going to have to be somewhere where it really does show off how it's cascading in this fashion. It's really quite wonderful. So a plant that really doesn't need that much light, and I would assume with these green leaves it probably doesn't even need as much light as I'm giving my other Pellionias, which I do have them growing in just a couple feet of my windows, but I think I might try this one as far back as maybe 6 feet from a window, and yeah, I'm really excited to see how it goes. It's such a beautiful plant. It's really just quite dazzling with this green foliage. Alrighty, and I have this very lovely, this is a Medinilla right here. So this is Medinilla Gregori Hambali, and this is a really showy houseplant. It does kind of remind me of the piper I was just talking about, because I don't know if you noticed, but on the back sides of the leaves on that piper, as well as the other piper I was talking about, which I'm sure I've shown you guys footage of at this point because I've mentioned it so much, that it gets these little sugar crystals on the back sides of the leaves. And I just think that's so interesting. It's such a wonderful trait for these plants to have. Of course, you could kind of unknowingly mistake it for pests, but if you do a little bit of research about these types of plants, you'll see that that's actually something that's completely natural about the plant, and you actually don't even want to remove it off the plant because it's just a natural part about how this plant grows. So I think that's really interesting. And another thing about this plant that I am quite fond of is the back sides of the leaves are a very striking purple color versus the top sides of the leaves, which have a nice olive green color. So it's really quite wonderful. I'm a really big fan of plants that have different colors on both sides of the leaves. It's just an extra feature to appreciate. So this plant almost looks a little too nice for me to have in my home. It almost looks like it's not going to behave well. I probably should get this plant a glass enclosure to grow inside, and I think it would look really good with the pot that I have it in. But yeah, I probably should pay this one a little bit more mind to give it a little bit more humidity and maybe have it a little bit closer to a window or a grow light, as I have lost 2 leaves off this plant already, so I think it might be telling me something. Or it could just be acclimating to my home and it could be just a little bit of a fussy plant, but we'll see how that goes. Really wasn't that expensive whatsoever. It was pretty inexpensive, so if things go downhill, I won't be totally heartbroken, but I really would like to have a successful go with this plant because I've never grown a Medinilla before, but this one's really beautiful. So yeah, let's move on. I have some hanging plants to share for the last few. So this one is quite beautiful. I've been wanting to grow this plant for a really long time. This is Ruellia makoyana, and I think they call this trailing monkey vine or velvet monkey vine, or once again, a combination of all of the words I just said. I'm not quite positive, but I just think this plant is so wonderful. Let me just kind of nestle it out of its hanger here to give you guys the best view. But it's just such a beautiful houseplant. Look at these leaves. This is probably one that's more suitable for growing outside in the shade. But, I've heard of people, once again, growing this plant as a houseplant, so I thought I would give it a go. I think some of the issues that you approach more with plants that are supposed to be grown outside is that they're more susceptible to pests, as well as some of them are a little bit more picky with humidity and specific light. But I've noticed that with plants that are supposed to be grown outside, typically one of the biggest issues that you face inside is that they are just so much more susceptible to pests such as spider mites and aphids and thrips like that. So just something to be mindful of. but that is something that the houseplant systemic can help with. Of course, once again, not the spider mites, but this is such a beautiful plant. It's got nice purple foliage. I'm sure it's a little bit extra purple because it was probably growing in the greenhouse that I purchased it in for quite a while. So the foliage might get a little bit more green as it settles into my home. Nevertheless, it's still such a beautiful plant, and I'm so excited to see how this one grows in my home. I can tell from the way the foliage feels, it's definitely going to want to stay on the moist side, so I will pay a little bit more mind to it, but I do have it hanging up, so I don't think I'm setting myself up for success there if that is the case. So I will have to, pay a little bit more mind to it over the upcoming weeks as I'm starting to get used to this plant. But so beautiful. I would really love to have just a wonderful cascading plant of this Ruellia makoyana, one I've really been eyeing up for quite a long time. I can't even tell you how long I've been just waiting for me to stumble upon this plant. I've seen it online so many times, but I've never been convinced I was gonna do well with it. So when I stumbled upon it for a really good price, you give it a go. You know what I mean? Okay, and I have one more plant to share with you guys today. This is a Cissus. And actually, this is another one I've actually been wanting to grow for a long time. I've been seeing it at this greenhouse that I've been frequenting for a while, and so it was always in such large hanging baskets, and I just don't have the space for that. But finally, my last visit, they had it in small pots, so I got 2 of them and potted them up together. But this is a Cissus antarctica. They called this a kangaroo vine, and I think it's so lovely because, once again, it's got a very similar leaf structure to Cissus discolor, if you are familiar with that, except in the fact that it's just all plain green, and it's got much more of that texture of my Cissus rhombifolia, which is a much easier to grow Cissus, at least in my experience, than Cissus discolor, which is such a gorgeous plant. But I just think that it's so interesting that it's just got such an similar leaf shape. So once again, really not the most striking plant, but just because I see that similarity with this plant and the fact that it's just a green version of that, I personally am just head over heels for it. I'm already just a huge fan of Cissus plants. I definitely adore this plant for the same reason that I love the Pellionia I was just talking about, for the reason that it just looks very woodlandy and green and undemanding visually. It's just such a beautiful plant that has much more of a bohemian vibe, like a fern, let's say, and looks like I just kind of went out to the woods and dug it out of the ground and am displaying it in my home. So really does have such a nice vibe. I really love it for just gives me the vibe of the area of the United States where I live, so I just absolutely love it. So yeah, that's gonna about do it for today's plant haul for August in 2020. All the plants I've gotten, I have, as I said, taken it easy, so I don't know if I'm gonna have another plant haul next month, but you never know, things could go awry, so keep an eye out. So thank you guys so much for joining me. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Philly Foliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.